Good evening, everyone, and welcome to this month's special virtual parlor chat from the Morris-Jumel Mansion. My name is Catherine Hughes, and I am the Executive Director of the Morris-Jumel Mansion. I will be facilitating this evening's parlor chat while our programs manager, Maddie Mungo, is behind the scenes running tech. Tonight's topic is the Exterior Restoration and Accessibility Project at the MJM. We have with us Wayne Benjamin from the MJM Board of Trustees, Danielle Monopoli from the Historic House Trust, both providing presentations. Following these presentations, we are bringing onto the chat Meredith Horsford from the Historic House Trust, Steve Simon from the Parks Department, Gale Brewer, New York City Council member, and Christopher Noel, the Accessibility Coordinator for the Parks Department. They will all be answering your questions. Some have been submitted already, and we hope that their presentations will answer many of them. You can submit your questions via the Q&A function at the bottom of your screen. We will collect these and then begin after the presentations. So first slide, Maddie. I just want to let people know what is happening at the Morris-Jumel Mansion this week. We have a special presentation on Friday night. A one-man Christmas carol is happening inside the mansion. This performance starts at 7 on Friday, December 22nd. We also have winter activities each Saturday of December, so people can come and check those out. So we just want to let people know, first and foremost, what's happening at Morris-Jumel Mansion. Next slide. First, a little bit about the mansion. Let me share that it was built in 1765. It is the oldest residence in Manhattan, and it's the last surviving Revolutionary War headquarters of George Washington. It was built as the summer home by British Colonel Roger Morris and his wife, Mary Phillips Morris. The mansion would later become headquarters for George Washington and his Continental Army during the Battle of Harlem Heights. It was the home of the enigmatic Eliza Jemel and even Vice President Aaron Burr. In addition to being an important part of New York City and American history, the mansion is active as a community arts resource for the dynamic neighborhoods of Harlem, Washington Heights, and Inwood. We offer an array of educational programming in the arts, history, and historic preservation for a wide audience of local, national, and international visitors. We hope that the Morris-Jumel Mansion's virtual parlor provides for stimulating conversation while you can be at home enjoying a coffee or whatever you'd like of your choosing from the comfort of your home. Morris-Jumel Mansion hosts this series of online chats with a variety of experts to discuss topics that explore the history of the mansion, the area, New York City, and connect all of these to the present day. Virtual parlor chats are held on Zoom every third Wednesday of the month at 7 p.m. Tonight, we will extend to 8:30. Normally, we're only 7 to 8. Our goal this evening is to share information and answer people's questions and concerns about the Exterior Restoration Project. This will not be the only time that we will do something like this in the course of the restoration, but we wanted to make sure that there was a big opportunity before the end of the year. This session is recorded, and later on, if you are interested, you may email info@morrisjumel.org to ask for a Spanish translation of it. So you can put all of your questions in the Q&A. They will be collected during the course of the evening, and we will begin answering questions after the second presentation. So we also have a number of architectural aspects to the house that we want to talk about. Many of you have visited and you've seen our octagonal ballroom, which is very unique and possibly the first of its kind in the colonies. We also were declared a National Historic Landmark in 1961. Being a designated landmark means that we do want to maintain the house in a particular way so that we stay within the rules of being a landmark. So we'll be talking about some of that this evening. First, I want to welcome Wayne Benjamin. He is the Vice President of the MJM Board of Trustees. He is also a retired architect and very involved in the capital projects at Morris-Jumel Mansion. So welcome, Wayne.
Thank you, Catherine. And I also want to extend my welcome to the attendees at this virtual Parlor chat. Next slide, please. So as Catherine mentioned, I will provide an overview of various aspects of the exterior restoration and accessibility project, and then the Historic House Trust will provide further details. Just to give you some background on, the mansion and its operations, the structure is, owned by the City of New York, and it's under the jurisdiction of the City Parks Department. The Parks Department is generally responsible for the mansion's, repair and maintenance and restoration, and maintains the mechanical systems of the structure. Morris-Jumel Mansion, Inc., the board of which I'm a part, is a nonprofit entity. And we are responsible for exhibits and events and the interpretation. If you've been inside the mansion recently, and if you were there years ago, you'll see that the look of the rooms have changed, and that is part of our constant reinterpretation of that. We are also responsible for collections and decorative arts and programming and education, the museum operations, partnerships and communications. Basically, the Morris-Jumel Mansion, Inc. is the entity that is running the mansion as a historic house and museum. The house is part of the Historic House Trust, and that's a nonprofit that was formed in 1989 to preserve 23 historic houses located in New York City parks. And Morris-Jumel is one of a few, or perhaps maybe one of the only members of the Historic House Trust that's also accredited by the American Alliance of Museums. Next slide, please. So the Morris-Jumel board is really excited to have this project advancing. The last time there was a major restoration of the mansion, it was 1990. That's nearly 35 years ago. So this exterior restoration and accessibility project will restore the mansion's exterior to its true glory. The way the mansion looks today is a function of years of weathering, and the restoration project will address that, and it will also address any conditions that require repair or restoration. For the very first time, there will be an accessible entrance, so the main floor of the mansion will now be accessible to people who are in wheelchairs, and the restroom that is currently on the main floor that heretofore has been the women's room will be a unisex accessible bathroom. We have $8.4 million that have been allocated to the project, which roughly aligns with the project cost estimates for the scope of work. We've been working the pricing and the scope for some time, and the revised cost, the $8 million or so, is a function of schematic documents that have been completed by the project architect, Page Ayers Cowley Architecture LLC. And although Paige is not with us at this evening's presentation, Paige and her firm are really quite expert in historic preservation and restoration projects. Next slide, please. So the project team, as I mentioned, it includes New York City Parks, as this is a city-owned building, it is really the Parks Department or the City of New York that has the responsibility for advancing the project through the city's capital process. HHT is an invaluable partner. Morris-Jumel staff and board are integrally involved in the project. And of course, PACA, Page Akali, is the team that's bringing the expertise in historic preservation to the project. Next slide, please. So just an overview of how the project will proceed. And as I mentioned, HHT will get into more detail later. The scope will be broken into two phases, phase 1 and 2. And to help expedite the schedule, what heretofore has been phase 1 will be broken into phase 1A and 1B. The details of how phase 1 will be broken is not yet determined. HHT and Parks will advise on that as some final structural reports are done. The cost of phase 1 is currently estimated at $5.3 million, and that is indeed based upon the schematic documents provided by the project architect. And the cost of phase 2 are estimated at $2.8 million. The schedule for soliciting the contractor bids and the start of construction will be discussed later in this presentation by HHT. Next slide, please. So I mentioned the project will be broken into two phases. Part of the logic of breaking the project into two phases is much of the scope of work for phase 1 will require scaffolding on the outside of the building. And when we get to the next slide, we'll discuss, not yet, when we get to the next slide, we'll see that there is work on the exterior that, in terms of landscaping and excavation and site work, that would be difficult, if not impossible to do while scaffolding is around the building. So it made sense to say phase 1, which would include the exterior restoration of, the walls, the building envelope, as we call it, any structural enforcement, of course, restoration of the porch columns, including replacing the one that is currently missing, work on the roof and historic railings, a lot of the exterior work on building the ADA ramp and painting the exterior. That will be done in one shot when the scaffolding is in place. And so if we move to phase 2 on the next slide, you see in the next slide, we're talking about repair, reconstruction of the concrete retaining wall, which takes you down to the colonial kitchen, some waterproofing, the foundation, cleaning and patching of, masonry and replacement of, railings at the porch, and restoration of windows and exterior pathways in the Bluestone Plaza. Work like that clearly, could not be done with scaffolding in place, nor would you want some of that work done with scaffolding in place and lots of construction workers, because particularly the Bluestone Plaza would be damaged by heavy construction traffic. In addition, phase 2 will have exterior lighting and landscaping and other site work. So that's the logic of why we have a phase 1 and phase 2 breakout of the project scope. It's one project, it's proceeding in 2 phases. Next slide, please. So very briefly, in terms of the things that have been completed to date for the project, the existing conditions of the building have been thoroughly surveyed, from roof to foundation. There are some supplemental structural surveys that are underway and are nearing completion. The schematic design is complete, and that schematic design has allowed us to get a much better handle on what project costs are. The Landmarks Preservation Commission, which is required to review and approve this, since it is both a national landmark and a New York City landmark, inside and out, that approval is in place. It was presented to LPC last year. It went through a community board presentation as well. So that important approval is in place. So the next steps in the process would be, soliciting the contractor bids, updating the project budget, and the project will then be poised for implementation. having an estimate of the project is not quite the same as having the actual contractor bids. The actual contractor bids will tell us what we can hold an entity to perform the work. The estimate just gives us a sense of what it is reasonable to budget. Next slide, please. So in terms of funds, and of course, funding is critical to advancing the project. As a city capital project, anyone who is in attendance who has worked with city projects knows that the Mayor's Office of Management and Budget will not allow you to advance a project that doesn't have the funds allocated, all of the funds allocated. You cannot do it piecemeal. So through the advocacy of Morris-Jumel's board, we have secured $8.4 million in city capital, no small feat. And that funding has been provided by, both former and current elected officials, including, former Mayor Bill de Blasio, Gale Brewer, when she was borough president, Councilman Envíanos Rodriguez, when he was in the council. And that funding continues with the current mayor, Eric Adams, and borough president Mark Levine, council member Carmen de la Rosa, Senator Robert Jackson, although I must admit that when Senator Jackson was Councilman Jackson, he was also a strong supporter of the mansion, and Assemblyman Al Taylor. Next slide, please. And the funds did not come to us in one fell swoop. That $8.4 million allocation was funded over a 10-year period beginning in fiscal year 2015, which is more or less, July of 2014. New York City Parks and HHC consider the project to be substantially funded. There are, as we've discussed, aspects of the project scope that are still being, investigated. For example, the extent of roof repairs, that is, we're putting the final, touch on that report. So the actual costs will not be determined until we have contractor bids. So at this juncture, the board continues to advocate for approximately an additional $2 million in capital funds based upon initial project estimates before we had the schematic designs. Prices were about $2 million higher. You can never have too much money. And this is a 258-year-old building, and it is a historic structure. We want to make sure that funding is in place, not only to do the job right, but to cover any eventuality that may come up in the course of advancing the work. Next slide, please. So this gives you a sense of, the funding over that 10-year period, starting in fiscal year 2015 with just over $1 million. And every year, fiscal year after that, except for fiscal year 2017, for some strange reason, we've received allocations from either the borough president, the city council, the mayor, and more recently from the state senator. And we will also be speaking to our colleagues in the assembly for their support as well. So that shows you starting in 2015 and taking us through the current fiscal year, we've got $8,434,000 allocated to this project, roughly estimated at a cost of $8 million. So that's why we say we are substantially funded. Next slide, please. So from my part of the presentation, just, a few closing comments. The Morris-Jumel board and staff, we are absolutely, dedicated to the preservation and restoration of the mansion. Early in my presentation, I talked about the things we do on the inside of the mansion, the programs, event, the reinterpretation. That said, the mansion itself is the single largest object in the museum's collection. It is the building that is, the gem that holds everything else. So we are absolutely dedicated and a champion for the preservation of, the building. We've advocated for this exterior restoration project with city elected officials and with parks and with HHT for over a decade, and we are absolutely appreciative of the steadfast support we have, received from elected officials who have allocated funds. But that's, what has been done so far. We welcome additional funding, and we will need additional funding, and we welcome it from, the community and from public and private sources. We will not turn down a capital dollar. We continue to work closely with our partners in Parks and HHT to navigate the city's complex process for advancing capital projects, and we look forward to getting the work underway. With that, I will turn the screen over to the next speaker, who I believe is Danielle Monopoli of the Historic House Trust. Thank you so much, Catherine.
Thank you, Wayne. As Wayne said, we now have Danielle Monopoli from the Historic House Trust. Danielle has been working very, very closely with the project for a long time. So I'm going to welcome Danielle to the virtual Parlor chat and turn it over to her.
Great. Thank you, Catherine. As Catherine said, my name is Danielle Monopoli. I'm an architectural conservator with the Historic House Trust. Next slide. Little intro cover. So just some background on the Historic House Trust. The Historic House Trust is a nonprofit partner of NYC Parks that advocates for, promotes, and provides expertise to preserve 23 publicly owned sites located throughout New York City's 5 boroughs. Next slide. Yep. Nice little graphic. 23 sites spans across all 5 boroughs with over 370 years of history. These are our partner sites. We continue to work on capital projects throughout the 5 boroughs at many of these sites. But we're here today to talk about the Morris-Jumel Mansion. So some nice historic photos of the mansion throughout time. We can see a change in the structure. It's always been a living structure. It's adapted to the environment. Like you see it, the design has changed, but we always come back. And a nice little timeline just from when Parks acquired the site. So we see in February of 1903, there was a lien placed against the property due to foreclosure. The city bought it and it was turned into a park in December of 1903. 1936, the Parks Department completed a restoration project. In 67, it was landmarked by LPC. In 1975, it was an interior landmark designation, and the most recent capital project completed at the site was in 1990. Next slide. And I also wanted to show, highlight the southeast column that is missing today and where the shoring tower has been installed. And this column does have a history of deterioration, as we see in the 70s, 80s, an undated photo. And it's something that we have repeatedly addressed. Next slide. And here we see some of the conditions that are very familiar to us today, but these are photos from the 1980s prior to the 1990 restoration. Next slide. And these conditions did prompt that restoration, that partial restoration project. Next slide. Just some nice progress photos of that project. The restoration of the columns at the south porch. Stripping away paint for new paint, removing the deteriorated balustrades for installation of a new set of balustrade. Next slide. And the mansion in 2000, shortly after project completion. Which brings us to where we are today, our current capital project, the accessibility and restoration project. Yep, next slide. And Wayne did a great job showing the funding allocated for the project, so I won't go into detail there. There's a nice graph at the bottom showing the timeline of this project from initial fundraising from 2014 to 2020, when it was considered substantially funded. Design procurement, or when registration with the city took place, which was from spring to summer 2021. and the official start of design, which was August 2021 to where we are today. That's supposed to say January 2024. And then from winter to spring, we expect construction procurement, so eventual registration of the project with the city, and then beginning construction in summer 2024. Next slide. And this is a graph provided by the Parks Department showing step-by-step the design, procurement, and construction phases. You can see where we are today. It is construction to final document review for the phase 1 scope that Wayne discussed. January 2024, we expect contractor bid solicitation and construction to begin in summer 2024. Next slide. In the summer of 2022, we completed some probe work to investigate exterior and some interior structural components of the house. Next slide. And in 2023, we completed additional probes at the south columns to determine their structural integrity. Next slide, yep, thanks. And although there were some unfortunate circumstances, such as removing the balustrade and the southeast column failing, these circumstances did allow us to observe these components in ways that we otherwise wouldn't have been able to. Next slide. Such as the balustrade pieces, which we were able to measure in more detail and store within HHT's storage facility for future reference by a contractor for measurements and shop drawings. So it got them out of the elements to better able to preserve them for future reference. Next slide. And the column, no one's been able to look at the columns in this way since it was constructed. There have been patches and repairs made to the column through the previous construction project, as well as over time with the Parks Department. But we weren't able to see the structure in this detail prior to removing the column, which has helped inform, next slide, our drawings today. So this is a draft set of the schematic plans, which are of the construction drawings, which are being revised to incorporate recent findings from the other structural investigations. Next slide. So as Wayne said, the work is being put out into 2 phases. The phase 1 will include work like the full exterior restoration, including the windows, full roof replacement, stabilizing the porch columns, converting the first floor bathroom to ADA, renovating the basement bathroom, and some interior plaster repairs. Phase 2 includes reconstructing the rooftop balustrades, the porch columns, restoring the bluestone patio, resetting the perimeter gutter blocks so that they drain correctly, constructing the ADA ramp at the east entrance, reconstructing the architectural lighting system around the house so that it functions, reconstructing the exterior basement stairs and the retaining wall, as well as waterproofing the foundation. And I also wanted to include some slides on the accessibility portion of this project. So these are plans that were brought to LPC. It was investigated putting a ramp at the front entrance. LPC had recommendations to place it at the east side. And next slide. And it's better able to see through these renderings, which differ from the initial renderings submitted to LPC. There is no longer a turnaround, so it's just a straight run ramp. It's much shorter in length. It's less destructive to the landscape at the east side of the house. And it will also be iron railings, which was a preference given to us by LPC to match the iron railings that are currently on the site, which you can see at the basement entrance, as well as at the front of the house. They also preferred the iron railings for their transparency to see more of the house so it's not too obscured. Next slide. And I also want to give some information on what to expect during construction. So we expect the museum to remain open throughout the duration of construction, except during the completion of specific scope items, such as the bathrooms. The perimeter of the house will be fenced off approximately 40 feet from the house. The public will not be able to be within the construction area. The majority of the park paths will remain accessible to the public, except those within the construction fence. If at any time the park requires closure, this will be communicated via social media, signs posted on the site, as well as through the Parks Department's website for Roger Morris Park. Construction hours in the city tend to be start time from between 7 and 8 and finishing between 3 and 4. And you will always see more activity during warmer months. Estimated useful life, just some information. The wood shingle roof is expected to last 30 to 50 years, window frames approximately 15 years, and exterior paint approximately 10 years. Next slide. And how can you help? So this will be discussed more by the panel. And yeah, I think we can introduce the panel at this time.
Thank you, Danielle.
Yeah.
Appreciate that. How can you help? We encourage you to talk with your city council member about streamlining the capital process in general. That's not, just about us. That's about the capital process itself. Keep your elected officials updated on the importance of the mansion so that they can be aware of, they can be called upon if we need more capital funds. Talk to New Yorkers for Parks. That is an organization that will help you get involved with New York Parks advocacy. Donate to the mansion to ensure that we can continue operating during construction. Connect funders in your network to the mansion and HHT to talk about future private restorations, privately funded restorations. Spread the word to your friends and family and visit. Come and see us. Come in and check out the museum. A lot of people might have been in the park, but not come into the museum. So come and attend an event here or a program. And then post why you love the park and the site on social media. Tell us what what it holds for you in your life. Stop by and say hello to us. We are advocating tirelessly to complete the project. So those are just some things that you can do to help. Now I'm going to bring on all of our panel. So in addition to Wayne Benjamin and Danielle Monopoli, as I said at the beginning, we have Steve Simon from the Parks Department, Gale Brewer, City Council member, Christopher Noel, who is an advocate. He is, can't remember your title, Chris. You are the accessibility coordinator for parks. So everyone is available to answer questions. And I know I have seen this question, and I'm going to ask Meredith to take this. Meredith Horsford is director of the Historic House Trust. Meredith, people want to know, why has it taken so long? That's just a big question on people's minds.
Sure. Thanks, Catherine, and thanks for the question. Thanks for having me tonight. It's really great to be with all of you tonight and chat a little bit about this wonderful gem that we care about so much. So great question. Why is it taking so long? There are a couple of reasons that I can speak to that kind of lead to this. A couple of things. First off, I'll say it's really amazing and exciting that the Morris-Jumel Mansion board has been able to advocate with their elected officials and to amass about $8.4 million for this really important project. So I'm really happy to be working with them on this project. So the length of time for the project, as you saw in some of Wayne and Danielle's talking points, are, that it really took from 2014 to 2021 to gather up the majority of those funds. And we can't actually start the project until the project is substantially funded, just as you can't hire someone to renovate your kitchen if you don't have the money to hire them, right? We don't want to start a bunch of projects throughout the city and then not be able to finish them because we don't have enough funding. So we can't actually legally start the process until the project is substantially completed or substantially funded, excuse me. So I know it's been a frustrating process and it's, hard to be patient as we wait for that to happen. But what's been happening behind the scenes is really exciting. Additionally, in addition to kind of waiting until we gather all that funding, we also have a lot of approvals that we have to get along the way, including Landmarks, which is a great partner of ours, but we actually can't move forward until we have their approval on certain aspects of this project. Also, not that anybody wants to talk about COVID anymore, but COVID was a real hurdle for a lot of capital projects, really kind of came to a halt. There was about a year and a half where almost no work was really happening. So that was also a really, another hurdle in kind of getting things working. So now that we are past all of those things, we're in, we've been working really closely with Paige Cowley on the design of the project. We're really looking forward to moving forward on that.
Okay, thank you, Meredith. I have a clarification question that I think is probably for you, Danielle. The question is, it was stated that phase 2 would be done after scaffolding is removed, but won't restoration of the columns and rooftop balustrade require scaffolding? So can you just clarify the difference between what's going to happen in phase 1 and 2?
Well, yeah, so that is more of a scheduling with the contractor discussion that we will have with them, so that any of the work that still requires the scaffolding will occur while the scaffolding is still in place, and any of the work that needs to be done when the scaffolding is removed will be completed at a later date in the contractor's timeline.
And if I could just add, to that, the conceptual breakdown of phase 1 and phase 2. I mean, it's like for phase 1, it's envisioned that the full building will be scaffolded. So that's like every side of it. In phase 2, while scaffolding still may be up, it is not envisioned that the entire building will have scaffolding around it. So there will be areas where it is feasible to do site work and excavations. And there'll be other areas where, once again, the contractor would have to wait to get, to site work. So it's kind of full scaffolding versus only where it is needed.
We have a question that is possibly something, Chris, you can address, but also I think we talked about it a little bit. Let's talk about the ramp being on the side that it is. It's on the east side. There is a question, why is it not right when you come in on the side that people see right away?
Okay. Well, it's an LPC thing. If it was up to Parks, when we do most of our projects, we make sure that if we have an accessible entrance, it's towards the front, whether it's a park, a playground, if we're removing steps to make a ramp, we like people to all come in together through the entrance together and not necessarily have to go around the rear. But it was a complete LPC decision that we obviously had to go with to make the site more accessible. As most of you might remember, we did have an accessible ramp, a temporary ramp that was on the west side, but obviously that can only stay up for a limited number of years. I think it was up for maybe 2 years. And I say that to say she's no longer with us, but Edith Prentice, who was a major disability advocate pushed for it, and we made sure that she have it. She passed away, but I'm sure that she would be happy to see that we are putting a permanent ramp in. She might be a little upset that it was on East Side, but I'm sure that she would be happy, and she's happy right now looking down on us, saying that, you know, a site that was in her area, her district, is now going to be accessible. So we're happy for that, but it was definitely an LPC decision that made us put it there.
Great, thank you, Chris. Connected to that, we have another question asking about the brick walkways and what is going to be done about the brick walkways that lead around the mansion to the back. Now, that question, I'm not sure. Meredith, you want to take that? Okay, go
Sure,
ahead.
happy to. Thanks, Catherine. So the pathways that are leading up to the ramp that Chris was just talking about will be redone through this capital project. The remainder of the pathways will not be done through this capital project. They will not fit financially in the scope of work for this project. But what I will say is it's something that we are very aware of and that we are trying to fundraise for. So if there are people who have connections or, you know anyone that's interested in privately fundraising for such a project, we are all for it and look forward to working on it.
Thank you. What is the likely completion date for all renovations of the project? I think that would be to you, Danielle.
I can step in and then Danielle, feel free to add on. I think that the whole idea of the phasing of this project was really to speed up the process and make sure that if there are pieces of this project that take a little bit longer to plan for, like the ramp, that we're not holding up the entire progress of the entire project. So that's why we're doing the phasing. I think we won't know more about specific dates of when all phases will be complete until we actually get started on the construction, and then we'd be happy to come back and, you know, give you all an update.
Okay, we have a question about the roof. Is the roof less than 20 years old? And do we understand why it hasn't performed as well if it is only 20 years old? Will the new design address the issues that maybe cause some of the problems in the current roof? Danielle, go right ahead.
Yeah, so the roof was actually only partially replaced during the 1990 restoration. So the parts that were replaced are about 33 years old. So it's roughly within the timeline of a roof needing to be replaced. This project is going to be a full replacement of the entire roof. So we'll be addressing those issues.
Okay, great. So I have a question. Has SHPO signed off on the work?
Yeah, I can. Yeah, so city projects that are funded through city funds do not go to SHPO, they go to LPC.
Okay. And can you just say for the layman what those acronyms are?
SHPO is the State Historic Preservation Office, and LPC is the Landmarks Preservation Committee, a city agency.
Thank you. And are there lessons that we have learned from the 1990 restoration that would inform the current one? I know that it's been, you know, the more that we've discovered about the previous restoration, it really has told us in many ways how limited that restoration was. And I'm not sure, Danielle,
I'll jump in here and Danielle can certainly add. I think one of the things that we've learned, and as we look back at some of these older historic restorations, I think that there was a bit of a trend of doing partial restorations, which is what was done in the 90s. And I think what we're really trying to strive for now and moving forward is to do full restorations as much as possible, so that we're not addressing needs in portions of the house and then having to come back several years later and address other portions of the house.
Does anybody want to add to that? Go ahead, Wayne.
Not necessarily for part of this discussion, because we don't have the architect with us, but it would be interesting for us to post to our website, lessons learned. And that indeed could be something where our current architects could, give us some bullet points of, based upon their current investigation, what are some of the things they've learned from the prior restoration and what are best practices moving forward. I think that's an interesting question for us to ask our architect and for us to share with the community once we get it.
Thank you. We have a question about what happens if bids come in high and are more than the money that we have raised. Go ahead, Wayne.
That is one of the reasons why, although the project is considered substantially funded, the board continues to advocate for at least another $2 million with our city and state officials, because we want to make sure we have a funding cushion. So I provided a couple months ago information to our assemblyman, and will continue to coordinate with the borough president and our city council representatives in the next round of funding to get at least another, $2 million. As I said, the original estimate was slightly higher than what we're working with now, but we're still using that original number as a target for funding.
Thank you. We have a question about ongoing maintenance, and I know that this is something that Meredith wants to probably talk about, because we do talk about this.
I sure do.
What is the plan for funding and providing maintenance and ongoing painting to prevent deterioration again? Because probably as soon as we finish with this, we need to start over. We need to...
Great question. Yes, maintenance at historic houses is an ongoing, never-ending process. But one of the things that we're really thinking about is being much more proactive about preventative maintenance and trying to make sure that projects like this restoration project last a lot longer. And so there are a couple of new initiatives that we've started at the Historic House Trust, and we're always looking to be more forward-thinking and thinking about how can we ensure that these treasures that we are charged with stewarding are in the best condition that they can be in. So one of those initiatives is our Paint to Preserve project. There is no real mechanism in terms of maintenance for painting of any kind. And it's not technically a capitally eligible piece of a project either. It has to be sort of coupled with larger things. So that is one of the quandaries that we're always in with painting, is that it's not really a maintenance project and it's not really a capital project. So we actually have right now for 2024, we are starting to work with Benjamin Moore and hoping that they will continue to donate paint to support our painting initiatives. And we already have a commitment from one of our friendly divisions in the Parks Department, who has committed to painting 2 of the historic houses in 2024. So that is a project that we plan to initiate in 2024 and expand upon. Additionally, we know that, maintenance of these sites is expensive as well. So in addition to the support that we receive from the Parks Department in terms of regular maintenance that they're already doing on a regular basis, we already also have a new initiative called the Sustainable Stewardship Fund, where we as a nonprofit are privately fundraising for some of these maintenance initiatives so that we can sort of fill the gap where we can have the Parks Department handling the parts that they can do. And then the things that are kind of outside of their scope or beyond their kind of funding mechanisms, we are trying to step in as a nonprofit and support those initiatives.
Great, thank you. We have a question. Will the project include any plumbing, electrical, heating, or HVAC upgrades or replacements? Since we don't have AC, it would not be an upgrade because we don't have that system. But Danielle, would you like to take that?
So with the renovations of the bathrooms, some plumbing is included in the scope. Electric is currently not included in the scope, but it is something we are investigating with Parks electrical engineers. But currently, no electric is included in the scope.
Hey, I wanted to give Steve
Catherine?
and I'm sorry, go ahead.
Actually, I think you're going exactly where I was going. I thought that we might pause the questions for a second and allow Gale Brewer and
That's-
Steve Simon to share their thoughts with us and then resume questions.
That is exactly what I was going to do.
Exactly.
So wanted to give Gail and Steve an opportunity to give their perspective. Gail, you have been involved in this project for a long time and very supportive. So can we start with you, just giving us a little bit about your experience with the project?
Well, it's not half as deep as yours. Obviously, as borough president, I put funding in. And I did spend a lot of time with the residents of the neighborhood. That's something we haven't talked about. I know it's a little bit of a touchy subject maybe. But I know that you've had them over for events and so on, and they've been able to use it for their meetings. But I think that's where it's maybe not big bucks, but it needs a constant update. And I'll say that because I don't know all of your great houses, Meredith, but this must be one of the ones that has a lot of neighborhood interest. Not every house does. So I think this has more than most. And it's a community that believes in preservation, just look across the street, so on and so forth. So that's something that needs to be discussed and how you're going to do that on a regular basis. To get more money, certainly Carmen, Mark Levine, I can try even through the speaker. We can all try to get more money. I mean, if by some miracle the House goes Democratic, then maybe this congressman could give some money. But you know, this is such a gem. It's an unbelievable gem. Of course, half the world doesn't know it. You know it. We always trying to get more people to know about it. You know, and then you need some, you know, some backer somewhere, some angel always helps too. That doesn't seem to exist right now. But sometimes when you talk to the neighborhood, you might find an angel somewhere. It's helped a lot in other locations. You know, somebody just happens to have quite a few million, and there are people out there. So I mean, I don't have any magic wands, but I do know that I think we could work more on the money. I think we could work more on the community. I assume school groups come in. I assume you do all that. It's the daily, you know, just how far you can expand, I don't know. But you know, between the community board and the neighborhood, on a regular basis, whatever that is, quarterly, whatever, just updates. People are very frustrated, as you heard from the beginning, about the length of time because they didn't really know what was going on. And then whenever that thing took those things off the roof, oh my God, people went nuts. But they didn't know what was going on. I know, and then there's been a lot of turnover in terms of board and staffing. So we put all that together, and then you get people worried that this gem isn't being taken care of, even though it is. But you know, in my world, perception is more important than reality, to be honest with you. And so you do have a perception problem. So that's why I'm here, is to say, what can I do to help on that level? And I know there's a lot of people who, you know, want to be helpful. But this is a great beginning. So I would say congratulations.
Thank you, Gail. Thank you very much. Steve, can I turn it over to you?
Sure, why not? I have been involved in supporting this mansion since 1978, when I worked for the late council member Stan Michaels. And despite the references to the 1990 renovation, I was heavily involved in raising the money for that project. So I actually take pride in the fact that I have supported the mansion over the years. And there was another project which we haven't mentioned, which I helped get funding for at some point, maybe around 2005. We redid the perimeter sidewalks and the walls, some of the walls surrounding the park. And I have helped lobby for this funding over the years. several years ago, I thought I had scrounged around and come up with the last pieces of funding we needed to fully fund the project, only to learn shortly afterwards that the project had grown, that we had found while doing some of the planning work that more work was required. And then, of course, we came upon a situation with the failure of that column, which really required some more money as well. But I was very busy a few years back scrounging around and transferring money from other projects and coming up with what I thought was the the last couple of $100,000, and then we turned around and needed more money. I would like to say that I think the board has done a commendable job, an amazing job, raising over $8 million for this for the project. And I feel confident in response to the earlier question that if the bids come in somewhat high, first of all, we do have a cushion with some of the money that's been set aside for phase two. But I also think that this project now is such a high priority that we're going to find the money somehow to make good on those bids. We don't want to put this out once again. And the advantage of having the Historic House Trust involved is that, in fact, that automatically streamlines the capital process, because the Historic House Trust doesn't have to go through all of the bureaucratic phases steps that the Parks Department has to go through. And so the HHD has the ability to put the project out for bid, award the contract, do the construction supervision, manage it through the construction process, and we actually save time by using the Historic House Trust. I don't think that point has been made. And the last thing I want to say, and I'm surprised, Catherine, that you have not mentioned it, that one way to support the mansion is to become a member, which is what I recently, which I recently have done. And I don't know why I didn't do it 43 years ago or 45 years ago, but I finally became a member. And so and it doesn't take much to do that. So I would encourage everyone on this call, if you're interested in the mansion, one way to show your support is to become a member.
Absolutely. I definitely encourage that. We have a question, actually. Is there a friends group for the mansion? And, if we have people interested in helping us, we don't have a friends group per se, but we are open to, getting people involved in the mansion. So please reach out to me, chughes@morris-jumel.org. We want to be able to, allow your interest to have a say in what's happening over here. We're part of the community. We consider ourselves very much a neighbor, and we want to be a good neighbor in what we do. So I've sort of answered that, and I wanted to go on to another one, which is very much, we've talked about this a little bit, the cyclical nature of maintenance for the property. And we don't have a set cost. This person is asking if we have a clue as to what the annual cost might be for a maintenance plan for the house. And I don't think we have ever set that out because
one thing, I'm sorry, Catherine.
No, go ahead, Meredith, because I know this is a big interest of yours with everything, the initiatives that you're doing.
Sure. Well, one thing that we do know for sure is the amount of services that the Parks Department and the Historic House Trust puts into this site and all of our sites every year. So that is something that we track very closely. So every time there is a work order or something that is repaired, or HHT covers some maintenance level thing, that is something that we track. Also, the Parks Department pays for all of the utilities at the site. So that is something, I don't have those numbers off the top of my head for 23 different sites, but that is something that we do track regularly. And, you know, that is something that is sort of ever changing and ever growing at all of the sites, because inevitably there are surprises at these historic houses that kind of come up that we figure out a way how to manage.
And then the caretaker is a Parks employee, is he not?
He is.
Yes. Yes, we have a caretaker on site who is a Parks employee as well. And
Who actually lives in the building?
yes, he does.
Yep.
Provide security. Which is important in a sort of vulnerable historic house like ours. So we have another question that is slightly out, it goes outside a little bit more to our garden and landscaping. Can Parks provide any info on work to improve the garden and landscaping?
I'm happy to address that one
The
too.
impact on the landscape, especially the impact of the restoration on the landscape.
Sure. So I guess a couple parts to that question. So in terms of the landscape in general, we work very closely with Jenna Lasort, who couldn't be here tonight, but she is the administrator for Northern Manhattan Parks. So she is very involved in the landscape at both Morris-Jumel and at the Dyckman Farmhouse Museum, where I actually was the director for the last 8 years prior to coming to HHT. So I'm sure she'd be happy to come to an additional, you know, a future meeting. She just couldn't be here tonight. So I'm sure she'd be happy to come and talk about landscape. And we also were talking probably last week about how the capital project will impact the landscape, what that means for visitors from the community, et cetera. So that'll be something that she and I will, and Catherine will continue to collaborate on as we move forward on this project.
We have a question about federal funding. Is the city seeking federal funding for the building as it's a National Historic Landmark?
Sure, we have looked into, and actually we're on the phone with the National Park Service just within the last week or so about some of their federal grants. But unfortunately for a project of this size, the cap on those Save America's Treasures grants, for example, is $750,000, which doesn't come close to addressing the needs at the Morris-Jumel Mansion. So it's not something that we would be seeking specifically for this capital project, but certainly at some of our other sites or at Morris-Jumel in the future, if we have a smaller scope project, that's certainly something that we would look into.
Okay, well, we are really getting to all of our questions. I'm just going through right now to see if I missed anyone's.
Yeah, but I want to go back to the Friends Up, because I know it's time, but people, you know, they like to be part of something. So like, you know, when we have institutions coming into the neighborhood, we often have what we consider an advisory board, community advisory board. I think, you know, it's something to think about, because then there would be a group of people who would be then responsible to go back to their neighbors. Because if you just sort of keep people updated, they don't have any stake in it. So something that's Friends Up, they don't have to do fundraising. If they did, it would be nice, but it's more, you know, keeping them up to date on a regular basis, meeting quarterly, whatever you want. I think, you know, something more formal perhaps than will keep you updated. It's something to think about.
And just on that point, Gale, a former MJM board member was working on that concept a few years ago. I don't know how much traction he got, but clearly it's something we can revisit.
Okay, I think it would
Well,
help.
and I have been working actually on really seeking an advisory board from not an advisory board, but a group of citizens from Washington Heights, Harlem, who can talk about being a parent, being you know, somebody older, younger, a really very diverse group who can help in many different ways, to inform us about community needs and how we might be able to help answer some of those needs. That's a little different and it's broader than the restoration itself. So it is something that I've been working on, but it can include the idea of disseminating information about everything, including
Right.
restoration.
That's fine. That's what I would love to see, something like that, or a smaller version come out of tonight, just so that we can.
Yeah, that would be great. So
If I can help anyway, let me know, because
okay, thank you, Gale.
I'm good with, I'm cranky and I get along with cranky people.
I
Great.
do have a question about going back to clarify when bid sheets will go out to contractors. Danielle, if you could address that.
I'm sorry, could you repeat that?
This person is asking that when will the architectural plans be finished and approved so that the capital funds allocation money can be released and bid sheets can go out to contractors? If that is not how
So,
it goes,
I think Meredith is gonna.
yeah,
yeah,
just
so we will be bidding the project out in January. I think that kind of answers the question. That's our timeline on sending out those bids to contractors, or sending out a request for bids. And one thing, just to add to one of the points that Steve made earlier, is we have a sole source contract with the city, and so that allows us to, especially for our really sensitive projects like this really big restoration at Morris-Jumel, to really be thoughtful about the contract and the whole process and the people who are working on these important buildings.
okay. I have another question. What city agencies, I think we've answered this question actually, just asking where the monies are from. We had that chart in the presentations, both Danielle and Wayne, charting where the money came from. And again, this session is recorded and will be on our YouTube channel. So anyone can go back and look at that, and they can see that information again. So please don't feel like this is the only time that you would be able to access that information.
Okay, Catherine, I think we can answer the question very easily. The funding comes from the mayor, from the city council, and from the borough president. And we also now have a pledge for additional money from State Senator Jackson. So it's the project that's going to get off the ground, hopefully in the summer, is entirely funded by the city.
Okay, great.
And I just wanted to add one thing, if you don't mind, Catherine. Because this comes up a lot at our historic houses, and ADA accessibility is really important to us, but also something that comes up a lot in these community meetings. I thought it would be great if Chris doesn't mind speaking a little bit to why at this site, and often at our other sites, we've chosen to go with a ramp instead of something like a lift.
All right, thank you, Meredith. Yeah, lift isn't something that's sustainable for parks. Lifts break down. It's going to be outside, so that means it would have to weather all the elements. With the ramp, it's something that's going to be sustained over a period of time. So that means that we wouldn't have to worry about a ramp going out. So now the site isn't as accessible as we had hoped it would be. So a ramp is something more sustainable for long-term use. Lifts break down. You have to get them repaired, and it's not worth the effort to even have it there. So the ramp is definitely the best way to go.
And if I could add to that, because internally we had a number of discussions on how to approach accessibility. And as you can see from the presentation, LPC, was concerned about the degree to which the railing of the ramp obscures the view of the house. So the visual impact of a lift from their perspective was simply not acceptable. I mean, a lift at the entrance to a historic 258-year-old building just wasn't going to work for them. And that was also, even if someone committed that they would fully fund a ramp every time it broke down, it would be instantly fixed, it would never have passed LPC.
And I can just second all of that. In my prior position at another historic house museum, we had a lift. It broke down every time we wanted to use it, and it was $1,000 each time a repairman had to come out and look at it. And so we raised the money to put a ramp in. It was amazing, the difference. It made it accessible. It was no longer a problem. It was something that really solved everything. So when I saw the plan for us to do this here, I knew exactly why, because of my prior experience. So at this point, we have answered the questions that have been in the Q&A, and we had, if there is anything that people have felt like we haven't answered, please do put that into the Q&A. We are going to be doing more about the restoration as we continue. This is not the only time that we will be talking about it in a public way as we are doing tonight. We wanted to do this quickly before the end of the year so that people could, so that some of those concerns that people have expressed could be answered. We want to, the goal here is to really be more transparent and to show you who is working on the project, who is doing, the diligent work behind the scenes, because you can't see what's happening. It's really frustrating when you look at the mansion and you don't see workmen on scaffolds doing things to shore up the mansion. But it is happening, and we want you to really have that understanding so that you can have, we want you to be part of it. We want you to be part of the process. So let me see if there are any other questions. We have a question about the storage of and handling, moving of the collection and archives during the construction. We don't intend to move the collection out during the restoration. We are going to be, Danielle, do you have any particular thoughts that you want to share on this? We've talked about it. But is there anything in particular that you would want to bring up on that?
Well, in regards to the lower floors, so the first and second floor, we will be installing protective sheeting to prevent any dust and debris from flowing into the museum from any active work areas like the bathrooms. On the third floor, that's ongoing discussions with the Morris-Jumel Mansion.
Because the third floor is going to be the most impacted, and that is not a public area. Those are our offices, archive, and collections areas. We'll be protecting them, but they won't necessarily have to be moved to the site. So we're going to be adapting as we go. And I think there is nothing that I know that somebody had a question in a prior session with the community board about vibrations, and the most vibrations that will happen are the replacement of the roof. But other than that, we will not have work that is causing lots of vibration.
And we'll also be, you know, continuously working together on ensuring that there's no, you know, dust, debris, damage, et cetera, to the collections on all floors.
I can, you know, our intention is to stay open as much as we can. We don't want to close the museum any more than we have to. We foresee, you know, there will be moments where we do have to close, that we won't be able to be in the building during a moment of construction, but for the most part, we will be open. We will be trying to carry on with school programs and public programs safely, but without cutting off everything from the house during the restoration, because the interior is not going to be nearly as affected. And somebody is asking, who is supervising the work? Paige Cowley, HHT Parks. That's the question. Do you want me to give that to you, Meredith?
Me or Danielle?
Yeah, I can answer. It's sort of a combination of all three of those. Paige Cowley will continue on through construction and will be there to inspect the site periodically. HHT will manage the construction contract and will also be on site. And Parks, same thing. They will also be supervising. So all three.
We'll be supervising the supervisors.
Yep.
Well, there'll be more supervisors of supervisors of supervisors, Steve Simon. I can tell you that right now.
Many supervisors.
Yes. Many. And all have my home number. So go ahead.
There's a request for clarification about if all the architectural plans are not completed by January, can it still go out to bid? But the architectural plans will be completed, correct?
So yes, so in order for us to get bids, yes, the architectural plans will be completed, but that's why we're phasing the project. So the bids for January is that set so that we can get bids on the portions of the drawings that are complete, and quite frankly, the most sensitive portions of the house, like the roof. So we're prioritizing those portions of the project so that we can get those started first.
Correct. Okay. At this point, we can probably wrap up.
Let me just ask a question of Meredith and Danielle, if I can step out of my role. Is it fair to assume that by March, you might be able to give us good news that an acceptable bid has been received and that you're taking steps to award the contract?
We hope to be able to. Yes, that would be lovely.
Yeah, I'm hoping we can come back to this group by March with some good news.
That would be great. We love good news.
Well, but you're going to give it to us.
That's the goal, Steve. Yes.
Okay.
And what about this,
Well-
the anonymous attendee? Did you get that question answered? About storage, you did all that? Okay.
Yes, we've got that. And so we want to thank everyone who has been a part of this evening's Parlor chat. Not only our panelists, especially our panelists, but not only our panelists, because we want to involve the community, and it's really amazing to realize how many people care about the Morris-Jumel Mansion. So I would love to be able to turn that love into memberships, as Steve suggested. Our annual appeal is right now. We are appealing to the community. We need your support. And so that is something happening right now. If you go on our social media, you will see a video that we made, those of us in the museum, asking for support. So I want to offer our panelists any last comments or words before we finish up.
I will just say, it's lovely to be connected with all of you. And as someone who ran a historic site for many years and was really involved in kind of community engagement and public programming, it's lovely, even though I'm in a different capacity now, to still be engaged in that work. So really great to be involved with all of you who are so passionate about this site.
Meredith only had to worry about who was sitting on the benches. She didn't have to worry about all the other neighborhood issues. That was the big issue, the bench.
The
So,
bench, that's right.
So it didn't have all the other ramifications. So I'm gonna go back to the friends of, or whatever you want to call it, by the next, I don't know, March or April, May, something like that. I'd love to see if there was some way of more formal structure for that. At least putting something together, including the, working with the community boards.
And so from the perspective of Morris-Jumel's board, I simply want to reiterate how supportive and dedicated we are to this, exterior restoration and accessibility project. And I actually thank Steve for, the comments on, the board's effort. It is something that we have, and we will continue to work diligently to advance. We don't believe in staying in our lane. We believe in making sure that whatever needs to be done is done, so that the funds are in place so we can move the project. And we, of course, thank everyone who's working with us to make that happen.
With that, I will say good evening. Have a lovely holiday season, everybody. Thank you.